One of the early influences during this really tough period, this recessionary period in the 80s, Paul Volcker, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, would get on the phone with bank examiners like me at a conference table and say, "Are you sure? What is it you're looking at when you say this loan can't be repaid?" Now, things have gotten bigger, and I don't think Jay Powell probably has a chance to sit down with individual examiners on these things. But it made an impression on me that regardless of your role, what you really are trying to solve for is understanding the implications of a decision that you're making.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Esther George. Esther was President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and a member of the Federal Open Market Committee from 2011 to 2023. She was actively involved in the Federal Reserve's work to ensure the smooth and efficient functioning of the nation's payment system, including leading the effort to establish instant retail payments known as the FedNow service. As the President and Chief Executive Officer, she led a workforce of 2,100 Federal Reserve employees, serving the 7 states of the 10th Federal Reserve District through the bank's headquarters in Kansas City and its branch offices in Denver, Oklahoma City, and Omaha. Esther is a recipient of the 2023 Harry S. Truman Public Service Award. She currently serves as the chair of the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation and on the boards of the Hallmark Corporation, the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the National Bureau of Economic Research, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, American Public Square, and the Kansas City 2026 World Cup. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Esther.
Esther, welcome to the Corporate Couch this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here.
Yeah, very, very excited and honored that we're going to chat today. You and I met at the Heartland Digital Asset Exchange last September 2025 through Heidi Lehman efforts to wrangle me into being the podcast host for the event. So, and you were the first interview out of 7 guest speakers. So yeah, very honored again, and looking forward to this more in-depth conversation since we only talked about 10 minutes on that one.
Good to see you again. A lot has happened since we talked. So.
Yes, a lot. We're going to talk about, almost 41 years at the Federal Reserve Bank and Kansas City FIFA World Cup 2026. But let's start with some fun questions, kind of maybe a little not in the normal business sense, but when you go to a happy hour with friends or family or a barbecue, what is the one question you get almost every time about the economy?
Mostly, what is the Fed going to do with interest rates? Everybody wants to know, are rates going up, down, sideways? And I usually say yes to all of those because the economy changes and you never know. I think more seriously, what's on people's minds right now. Some people use the word affordability, but really it's inflation. We went a long time in the United States without the inflation experience we saw in the 70s and 80s. And so when it hit after the pandemic, it has really reminded people how much they hate paying higher prices.
Yeah. Esther, are you a movie fan?
Yes, increasingly though, I'm looking at kids' movies since I have 3 grandchildren.
There you go. Well, actually, one of my questions, my fun questions that I was going to ask you right now, is about inflation. So, if inflation was a movie villain, which one would it be?
It would probably be Jaws. It would, it would, because it sort of is it's an invisible tax in some ways. We get our tax statements, but inflation pops up in a variety of ways, and it really depends on the collection of things that you're spending money on. So
Yeah,
if all of your disposable income goes for things like rent and gas and groceries, you will feel the impact of inflation a lot more than people who have more discretionary income. They may be going on trips or things, and their
yeah,
purchasing is a little bit different. So it can be a very personal kind of
yeah,
hit depending on what you're buying.
absolutely. And what's the funniest misconception over 41 years at the Federal Reserve Bank that people have about the Federal Reserve Bank's banking
Well,
system?
there's a lot of them. There's a lot of conspiracies around the Fed, but I think what people don't understand, people often think the Fed controls the economy, and that if you, for example, just lower interest rates, it will be better for everyone without thinking about what's the other side of that equation. So the Fed has a pretty narrow task in terms of how it affects the economy, and it doesn't really pull all the levers. Governments
Yeah,
pull the levers, that local, state, federal businesses have a huge influence on the state of our economy. And you and I, because we're consumers, that is really the largest driver of our economy.
right. And a question I ask most guests is, you're out there, you're on many boards, and you have you're a well-known speaker. But what thing would surprise people about you, even the people that know you fairly well?
Well, that's interesting. I think most people don't know I came from a very simple rural part of the country. I don't have a PhD in economics. Often many people that work in this business do come out of academia. I brought a different lens to the work I did. It was more a lens of finance. How does the economy work in terms of understanding the plumbing of it? I often get addressed as Dr. George, and I'm completely flattered by that.
Right.
But that wasn't really the credential that I brought to this work.
I see. So where did you grow up, Esther, and what was fun for you growing up?
I grew up in Northwest Missouri on a farm. I'm the 6th generation. I manage that farm today. So it's been in the family a long time. But, going through my teenage years, I couldn't wait to get away from the farm. When I look back now, some of the best times. You had a lot of freedom to explore, to be outside. As many people tell you, you learned hard work. And that didn't hurt me in the long run when it came to my professional career.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of people that grew up on farms and worked, getting up at 2:30 in the morning before school and working and then going to school. Are you still a morning person from your
Still
childhood?
a morning person. Yeah. Before the sun comes up, I'll find myself awake, and I still have to grab a cup of coffee, but awake nonetheless. So
There you go. Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer you can control your mornings because, when no one's up, the time is yours, but shit will start to happen once people are up and
for
about.
sure. For sure. Yeah. You really do protect that time too. It's important to kind of get yourself situated. And I think as you move into different kinds of jobs over your career, it really becomes important. Some people do that with hard exercise, meditating, getting out. Sometimes just quiet time for me is a way to center myself for the rest of the day.
So you graduate high school. What was your kind of decision-making process? You look like you graduated from Missouri Western.
Yeah, so when I got out of high school, as I said, I thought I needed to get to a big city. I had the good fortune of having parents that really were supportive of whatever direction, that we were interested in going. And so in my little high school, and Jeff, I had 50 people in my high school graduating class.
There you go.
There was a very influential teacher. She was an English teacher who also taught French classes. That was the only foreign language at that school. Not many of my fellow students were interested in that. And I thought that was sort of a glamorous thing to do, but she encouraged me to be a foreign exchange student.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I wanted to do that, and my parents were very supportive. I thought they were going to pay for my trip to be a foreign exchange student. I went to France. My dad shepherded me to the bank, sat down with the banker, and when the banker slipped across the table, here's your payment booklet for how you will repay the loan we're going to make to you to go on this trip. The whole experience, I think, really set my course in life. One was a financial commitment I'd made for something I really wanted to do. The other was the cultural experience. I thought the whole world looked like mine. And
Right.
then I went to Paris, France, and I learned that the French I was speaking in the Midwest didn't exactly sound like the French they were speaking in France. At the same time, from living with a family there, I learned that many of the things that I cared about, other people cared about too, whether it was having a good time, whether it was thinking about your family, what the next thing you were going to do. So that experience launched me in my undergraduate work. And again, I picked a state school that I could afford because I was paying for that, but also experienced people that really were interested in saying, you can do more than what you may think is possible. And that turned out to be important mentorship through that education process.
So you graduate from Missouri Western, and what was your major when you graduated?
Business administration.
Was your first job at the Federal Reserve, and how'd you get
No,
that?
my first job, again, I had my eyes on going to a big city, and I applied for a position at Dun & Bradstreet in New York as
Oh,
a
yeah.
business analyst.
Sure.
And I got the job. I didn't get the move to New York because it turned out they had an office in Kansas City at 31st and Main. And they said, you'll do your training there, and then we'll talk later about, your next position. So
Right.
I worked for Dun & Bradstreet as a business analyst for about a year and a half when I figured out they weren't
Okay.
sending me to New York. They were sending me out to Western Kansas and places
Right.
in the region. So
Yeah, I worked a lot with Dun and Bradstreet in my Sprint and Sprint PCS days, so very familiar with them and what they did. They were leading edge in terms of information about businesses, so that's fantastic. So you get a job at the Federal Reserve in 1982, which was a huge recession. So talk about why how'd you get the job, and were you afraid because of the recession that was one of the largest in American history?
yeah, so 1982, I had left Dun & Bradstreet. Good experience, but not, for a young person right out of college, cold calling on businesses took a particular kind of skill. And so I liked the travel part of that job. And the Kansas City Fed was offering a bank examiner position, which again, in the back of my mind, Jeff, I thought that job will require travel. They have a Federal Reserve in New York. I might actually get back there. And so I took that position as a bank examiner. But as you note, boy, was there a learning curve to that job. Because in 1982, not only did we have a deep recession, but that was affecting thousands of communities, and particularly in the Midwest. Hundreds of banks were closing. Farms were being foreclosed on, real estate businesses, ag. There was really a confluence of factors that were doing that. For me, taking that next job was really about, I needed a paycheck. I had a car payment. I had a home with a 13% mortgage on it. And I was looking for a job that would not only, be a good career opportunity, but help me pay the bills. And boy, was I lucky into what I stumbled into there.
Did you ever foresee, like you walk in day one as the bank examiner, did you foresee like 40 plus years later, I'm going to still be here?
No, and in fact, like many young people, when I saw the word federal in their name, I thought, yeah, 1 year will probably be good enough for me until I figure out what I really want to do. And
Right.
what kept me at that job, Jeff, for 40 plus years was a series of very different jobs in that organization, a sense of an organization of purpose that could really connect its mission to the work people were doing. And so I never felt like I was in one job all that time. And indeed, I wasn't. I got
Sure.
to do a lot of things at the Kansas City Fed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you eventually become the president in 2011 and serve in that role for 12 years. But like, if you can look back at, I mean, there probably were many, but the key moments that shaped your path from the bank examiner to president, can you reflect on those?
Yeah. So again, remembering the time I came into it, probably a lot of people don't remember this, but there was a small bank in Oklahoma that really triggered one of the largest bank failures in the United States. It was a little bank in Oklahoma City called Penn Square Bank. And within a few months of my joining the Fed, it became clear we were going to have to learn quickly how to identify risk, how to identify problems. And so they did a lot of training. They armed us with, when you go into these banks, here's what you're looking for. And my aha moment in that experience was sitting across the desk from a banker who was a third generation, their family wealth tied up in that bank, but so important to their community. They had been the lender for farmers, for businesses. They served on the hospital board. And when you sat across the table and said, your bank is not going to make it, your losses are greater than the capital, and they had already put money into this. They were trying to help their community survive this terrible period. It was a sobering time for me, and one where you had to listen more than you talked. It was easy enough to say, I'm the regulator here. Here's my badge. Here's my conclusions. Let's wrap this up and get going. But when you begin to understand how many people in that community would be affected by the outcome of that exam, it was one that really caused me to be very, not only careful in my analysis, but to be a better listener about what had driven this bank to the point that it was going to have to close its doors. And of course, at the same time, I mentioned I grew up on a farm. Just a year later, I stood on the front porch of my own family home and watched an auction, because we too were not immune from the forces that were driving high debt. High interest rates were a bad recipe during that time and caused a lot of businesses to fail. So it was both personal in that experience and also understanding the impact of making judgments about data you were looking at and how that would affect many people that you weren't even sitting across the desk from.
Yeah, I want to get to some of the economic crises that you faced during your tenure there, but talk about, obviously over that long period of time, and you're young in your 20s and you start there at the Federal Reserve Bank, but talk about the kind of the mentors and leaders that have major influence on your leadership style.
As many people do, I start with the influence of my parents because they were good listeners. I said they allowed us a lot of freedom to explore and to think about what we wanted to do, but they were also very good listeners. And I learned from that, sometimes you're not always solving problems. Sometimes you're just trying to find a path to a solution that will work in some way. And so I also had the good fortune of working with mentors. So when I came into the bank, the president of the bank at the time was someone that was willing to sit down with the new person. They weren't so far removed that at the lunch table, they wouldn't sit down and say, tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about how you are experiencing the organization. Very important in doing that. One of the early influences during this really tough period, this recessionary period in the 80s, Paul Volcker, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, would get on the phone with bank examiners like me at a conference table and say, are you sure? What is it you're looking at when you say this loan can't be repaid? Now, things have gotten bigger, and I don't think Jay Powell probably has a chance to sit down with individual examiners on these things, but it made an impression on me that regardless of your role, what you really are trying to solve for is understanding the implications of a decision that you're making. And so those were important influences. And of course, Jeff, as you know, along the way, you have people that are more formal mentors, less formal mentors that you observe. I learned a lot from watching people. I would watch during a bank exam some very experienced examiners who could deliver the toughest messages, and the banker across the desk would really be quite open and grateful to say, thanks for pointing that out. There were others that really stumbled over the message and really created more problems for themselves. And so many of my best mentors were watching people I wanted to emulate and say, you know what, more of that, not so much of that,
Right.
would be good for me to learn as I step into some of those leadership roles.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely learn from people that are great leaders and people that are not so great in terms of what not to do, for sure.
Absolutely. I've always said that sometimes we like to talk about the bad bosses we had. I learned a great deal from
Yeah.
them in terms of why that wasn't a good approach. So.
Yeah, you talked about Paul Volcker. I mean, were there other meetings that you were ever in over the course of your tenure there that you're like, holy cow, I'm in a meeting with so-and-so and so-and-so. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve is an institution that really sits in the background during good times. It comes to the fore during times of stress in the economy or financial instability. And so the leadership of the Federal Reserve, I mean, this happened in the great financial crisis. I had an opportunity to be seconded back to Washington, D.C., because by that time I'd had more experience in the bank supervision area. That was a tough time. And Ben Bernanke sitting across the table from people that were running these largest institutions, Ken Lewis at Bank of America, many of those leaders in the financial system in the room talking about what's going on. And so it brought you really front and center to where the decision making was happening that affects our economy, to understand the role they were playing. The job offered you many opportunities to have intersections with both names, positions, and influencers in our economy.
Yeah, you were talking about the 2008 financial crisis in terms of that example. Are you a fan of Michael Lewis's book and the movie The Big Short?
I am. I am. The diagnosis of what goes wrong can be easily oversimplified. And we see that today. People want to know, who can I blame for the inflation problem that we see? Who do we blame for this and that? And that diagnosis is so important. But one of the things I like about whether you're an author, you're making a movie, whatever, you are going to bring in many dimensions of a story that ends up affecting the entire economy. And you remember, in the telling of that story, real people were affected in many levels to this. So they are complex issues. And that, of course, was one of the good things about the job in terms of how you tackle that. It was also one of the unmanageable things many times in an economy that you have to make decisions about. You don't control all the levers.
Yeah, in '08, I was at Capital One in their home loan division. So I had worked there since 2005, and I knew that home prices couldn't keep increasing. It was increasing at 30-40% a year. I didn't foresee the economy going down, but I did say, like, the housing market has to have a correction for sure. But yeah, it was a fascinating
It's so
time.
true. So what you just described is really core to what policymakers are dealing with. You can see the symptoms. You can see the vulnerabilities around there. The question is always the timing. When has something reached the point at which action is required, whether that's, stepping in, and often it happens on the backside, which is the rescue operation, the putting money into the economy to do that, because nobody wants to call something that may not be, in fact, an issue, or to promote, a collapse of something before it's there. But I think in hindsight, that example you mentioned is one that will be in textbooks. It's going to be in a lot of the playbooks that future policymakers use, is to say, don't ignore the vulnerabilities you see and think it's not that big, nothing bad will happen, it hasn't happened yet. It was a stark reminder to policymakers of the risk.
Yeah, I mean the amount of the variations of no income loans, no proof.
Liar loans.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was. We did a second mortgage, RFC 125. It was a GMAC. You got 125% of the value of your home because
right.
yeah. It was
right.
crazy time for sure.
Yeah. In fact, I mentioned the lessons you learned from that. I thought during the pandemic crisis, one of the things we saw, you remembered after the mortgage crisis, people lost their homes. The government supported the large financial institutions as a way to say, we don't want the system to collapse, the financial system, but it left a lot of individuals in a bad, bad place. And we saw the recovery in that period took almost a decade for people to recover. You saw quite the opposite during the pandemic, right? You saw again this flood of money coming in and people getting checks. People, individuals now getting money. And it produced another outcome, inflation, but it did sustain people through that period so that we had a very rapid bounce back after that period. So a lot of things different about that. But in terms of, I think where the government learned, we might have been too stingy in helping the person on Main Street versus Wall Street. It was an example of how it probably played out with this pandemic experience.
Right. What was it like? You were obviously the president at the time when COVID hit. I mean, what was that like from a leadership and the challenges and the remote work for you?
Challenging on so many dimensions. Obviously, we were having Sunday evening calls with the Federal Open Market Committee about what to do for the economy, what role we would play in stabilizing the Treasury market. But there was another element which was much closer to home, and that were the employees that worked for the Kansas City Fed. And you were thinking about health and safety. You were thinking about how do we get the work done in a way that doesn't expose them unnecessarily to risk. And yet, when you're a Federal Reserve Bank, you have a cash operation that is part of money moving through the economy. Those people had to come in. There were a group of people that couldn't be remote when you were actually trying to operate things. So the decision making was multifaceted in terms of what are you doing for the macro economy? How are you understanding the health issues in the region? What are you doing for a group of people that you work with to make sure they're safe? And as you remember, our understanding of what was happening was evolving too. And so it was a little scary, to be honest, to understand, the day that I announced to our employees, we're going to send you home and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll make sure this thing, passes and then we'll get back. And that began to roll. That, because we were learning more, we weren't seeing that the thing diminished right away. And so I think the uncertainty that came with a shock to the economy, a global health issue, there were a lot of people working very hard to do it, but you were doing it with not a lot of information or historical perspective to lean on during that time.
Yeah. Would have been one thing you would have changed in terms of an action you took during that time? Or,
I'll tell you one of the advantages for me. So these 12 regional Federal Reserve banks are by design giving a place-based boundary, if you will, to understand what's happening on the ground. That was an enormous advantage in terms of being able to pick up the phone and call your local utility, hospital, manufacturer, others to say, what's happening in your part of the business, and to piece together, what do we see? It gave you a lot more data points at a time when there was a lot of disruption going on. I think as we look back, it was a good thing that we tried to separate the health part from what we were going to do with the macroeconomy. And what I mean by that is we did allow a lot of people to go work remotely, to say, you're doing that certainly for safety, but people stayed highly engaged during that period. They really connected. And I think for an institution, again, whose value proposition is purpose, is mission, people really doubled down. There was a Christmas Eve time when the administration was trying to issue money out to the public. And we could do that electronically, but not everyone has electronic access. We had people, Jeff, on Christmas Eve that worked all night to make sure that the systems were in place to get that money out. And it's just an example of, again, these were sort of wartime, times of crisis. You really see people step up to that. So they were times to be really proud of the work and see what happens behind the scenes, even in a time of really heightened uncertainty and fear, if you will, about where we were going with all that.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
Esther, you mentioned, and I know you were a member of the committee, the Federal Open Market Committee, but for those that don't know, what is that committee, the goal, and who do they serve?
Yeah, the Federal Open Market Committee is the body that deliberates on what's the right interest rate that will keep the economy at an equilibrium, if you will. Or, you don't want your policy to be too restrictive on the economy in terms of the cost of debt. You don't want it to be too easy most of the time until you run into a time of crisis. So then that's the committee, and it's comprised of the 12 regional Fed presidents, of which I was one. And then there's a government body in Washington, which today Jay Powell is the chair of, and there's 6 others. Those individuals are actually nominated by the President of the United States. They go through a Senate confirmation. So they really are the public part of the Federal Reserve. So all 19 of those individuals comprise the Federal Open Market Committee and are making decisions about what's our view of the economy, how does it look, and then how do we set our interest rate policy to make sure it responds to what the economy needs.
I'm going to insert a fun question here. I'm not sure. I recently met with a former employee of yours, probably like you were back in 1982 or 3 or 4, that type level probably. But that person asked me to get your take on wearing jeans at work.
It's a great question. It probably won't surprise people that an image of the Federal Reserve would be one of very professional, structured. We didn't have uniforms, but there were expectations, particularly early on. It was also a time when women were discouraged from wearing pants. We've come a long way in terms of thinking about, but the day that we were allowed to wear jeans was a big day at the Fed, and I think most people will remember that a long time.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for indulging me on that one.
A lot of people still talk about that, yeah. That and pantyhose.
Pantyhose, right? Let's talk a little bit about kind of explore our previous discussion on the Heartland Digital Asset Exchange podcast I did, but talk about the importance of innovation in the financial system, and how do you personally stay curious about new technologies in digital assets?
Yeah, I think that has been one of the most fascinating things about looking at the plumbing of the economy. So, I talked about the Fed's role in setting interest rates, but the Fed also has a significant role given it to by Congress to make sure that the rails of payments in the United States are safe and efficient. And in some cases, the Fed itself operates some of those systems. In other cases, private banks and others are operating those. And at the end of the day, you're trying to make sure that they don't unseat stability in our economy or in our financial system. So just as innovation and changes in technology have affected so much There was a time when we couldn't imagine using other than paper dollar bills to conduct commerce. And then we got the capability to do that digitally, to do that by moving money across computerized systems. And the payments began to move faster and they began to expand the economy. And so innovation is critical. It has been one of the key ingredients that has made the United States economy what it is today. But along with each of those innovations come changes to how do they intersect with legacy systems? How do they touch the broad swath of consumers in this country that rely on those payments? What does it cost to deliver those payments? And so we've seen that evolution over time where check writing, for example, we continue to write billions of paper checks in the United States today. Now they all get digitized, they get converted into an electronic form, but we are also seeing new forms of payments. So we're beginning to see something called a blockchain technology that people are now using to move value around, to move money around. And so that innovation is critical when you're focused on making sure you have an efficient payment system, one that is affordable and is safe. Each of these introductions, though, create a gap sometimes in our understanding of where is this going? How do we understand its safety? Blockchain, I think, has been a bit of a challenge in getting mainstream because one of its key features, at least around things like cryptocurrencies, is the anonymity that comes with that. So just like we can take a dollar bill and if I hand it to you, no one has to record that that moved. How does that work on this blockchain ledger? In the same way that keeps us safe from money launderers, keeps us safe from fraudsters, and yet integrates into our financial system. So today we are seeing government begin to step in and say, okay, we can create rules of the road for this. We can try to, bring it into the fore. But the innovation itself is critical. Its implications, sometimes not understood initially. In fact, many times innovation, we promote benefits first. The risk that come to that sometimes aren't really as well understood until there's a crisis, a hiccup of some kind around that. So for policymakers, for people that write these rules, they're always thinking about, okay, we see the benefits and where those might go. How do we understand the other side of the issue, which is if something goes wrong, who gets hurt and whose job is it to clean that up?
Right. So, Esther, what excites you most about the future of the financial system?
So I think the financial system is going to become more accessible. And it's certainly, we all have put our lives into a mobile phone. It is an amazing innovation in the economy. I was watching something the other day about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and, all the innovation that's come. And we often forget how it has changed the way we do things. I can now go on that phone and I have access to more history, more computing power. I can get questions answered that, save me brain cells that would have taken just magnitudes more time. So we're moving into a time that I think offers us things we couldn't think about before. And that both has promise for us. It's a little scary at the same time, too, to say, what do we leave behind? What are we prepared to accept with these new technologies? But I think on the whole, the story of this country and the story of innovation is we have found ways to harness it to raise the standard of living in this country. And that's really what you're after, whether it's productivity, whether it's, the innovation side of that. You are really trying to make people's lives better.
Yeah. If you had one big concern about the future of the financial system, what would it be?
So I worry a lot about a concentrated financial system because this is where technology leads you, right? You can put more into less. And we are seeing that today in the financial system. As it relates to banks, we are seeing the consolidation of banks. We have seen the roll-up of banks. What does that mean for people's access? You can get access electronically, but do people really understand needs on the ground? Again, going back to many small communities that we have in the United States. So I worry that we don't fully appreciate some of those things. When we look at I think that is such an exciting technology, but already you're beginning to see what its potential is in terms of replacing labor in the United States. And we witnessed this, 30, 40 years ago as manufacturing began to shift out of the United States. It was only after a long time that we said, wait a minute, we should have been thinking about the implications to real people of a system that was going to be more global, was going to have, more efficiency built into it, was going to be concentrated in a way we hadn't seen. And I hope now we will think about that too, because the potential to replace people with technology just continues to grow. And we need to think about the people part of that.
Yeah, I read an article recently about it's called AI arbitrage, where it's basically separating the people that have embraced AI and are using it versus those that are not doing it.
Right.
And really, people are not going to be replaced with AI. People are going to be replaced with people that embrace and use AI to
right.
be more effective, efficient, achieve goals. So it's definitely very interesting for sure. So Esther, after decades of Federal Reserve Bank, shaping national economic policy, you're now helping the Kansas City 2026 World Cup as a board member. What attracted you to be part of that organization?
Having spent most of my working life, adult life in Kansas City, I think it's such a great city in the United States. And I've been to many cities around the world and here in this country. And I think to be right here in the heartland, to watch a group of people that were really excited about bringing this opportunity to Kansas City. We're not unknown in terms of our sports teams, the networking that comes from that. So when I was invited to join this board for this opportunity to really shape and deliver on FIFA's requirements for hosting a World Cup, it felt like something I could contribute to, and I was really honored to be asked to say this will be a big deal for our community. It's an opportunity for us to be on the world stage and to show what Kansas City can do. And so it's been a journey of thinking about the kind of magnitude of a World Cup in a city the size of Kansas City that by many would say doesn't have all the advantages of some. We don't have big public transportation networks. We're a region. We really approach this not as Kansas City, but to say this is really a regional impact that we want to respond to.
Yeah.
So it's not direct connections for sure, but important ones as it relates to the Kansas City community.
Yeah, I believe we're the smallest, I should say, host city in terms of population size. So you talked about infrastructure, and I was going to bring it up, but what has surprised you most about this scale of preparation to host a World Cup in terms of infrastructure?
We went into this, I think, eyes wide open. We knew we didn't have the infrastructure to do it. And it really became an effort of rolling up your sleeves to say, how do you solve for it? Which meant you had to think about it earlier than other cities. The ability to say, the answer, we're not going to build trains. We're not going to be able to build more things to move people around. We could get buses. A lot of people will be looking for those buses. So making decisions early, really connecting the region, that's been really important in this effort, Jeff, as it relates to infrastructure, is because we sit on a state line, but the municipalities that make this region work had to be at the table. We had to really bring the people in that are making decisions, whether it's Kansas City ATA, whether it's on the Kansas side of looking at how transportation works, and really try to get the benefit of how people think about it, their expertise in doing that. And I think doing that early on really gave us a competitive advantage when it came time to saying, let's secure the resources we need so that we can build out the plan. That turned out to be a successful strategy in terms of being able to get a game plan together early on to meet our transportation needs. Yeah. And the airport, I should not, again, giving credit to people that thought about this long before the award of a World Cup games here. Having that airport was key, really, to us getting the bid, to having FIFA look and say, yes, you have a modern facility there that can accommodate people arriving to your city. So again, decisions others made earlier on was essential, and then complementing it with on the ground transportation.
Yeah. Now, I was going to bring up before you even mentioned the airport. I had the honor of interviewing Sly James on the podcast, and I just thought his story is incredible. Never held political office, becomes mayor of the 37th largest city, and all the things he did. But he brought to light like it's how hard it is to be the mayor of Kansas City because you're like you're so much smaller than San Francisco, but your square mileage and the diversity, downtown Kansas City versus the Northland. So you have rural, you have
Yep.
urban, and just the land mass that you have to manage with water and all the infrastructure. So, and obviously he I think was a big part of getting a new airport here.
It's a great story, Jeff, of how leaders make a difference.
Yeah.
And, you might give any leader a break for saying, for all the reasons you said, it's such a sprawling area. There's a lot of political interest in there that will make this hard to do. And indeed, I'm sure Sly James would tell you how many times he made a run at this. So the persistence, the perseverance, the vision, those are the things where we see leaders really pave the way. And
the streetcar.
The streetcar, all of those things. You have to be prepared to stand in the face of some level of adversity, some mountain that you think can't be overcome. Those are the things that really teach us, I think, the leadership lessons that are so important.
Yeah. I want to say with the first survey to the public about do we need a new airport, like it was less than 30% of the people.
Yeah.
It was like 25% thought we needed a new one.
Yeah. So, and the way the thing would get voted on, represented a subset of people that actually used the airport, which created another complexity to how, that leadership had to bring this forward. And so, engaging the business community at one point, even at the Kansas City Fed, a group of people that traveled a lot, we brought in the people that were really trying to make this happen to say, just educate us. That education became, I think, really essential to building the support to get that over the line. So anyway, it is such an essential part of the story of Kansas City hosting these matches that we can't forget that.
I don't know a better person I can ask the following question about the World Cup, about Kansas City, but what's your take on the economic impact it's going to bring to the community?
Yeah. So this question gets asked a lot, Jeff, because people want to know for the effort we're putting into this, what will we get out of it? And I will just be honest with you. The research that economists do on what do sports contribute to economic development is at best unclear, that you can say, oh, it will be this percentage. And so I'm always very honest with people. If you're looking for a number, I'd be very careful. Here's how I think you have to think about this, though. We are going to bring a lot of people, and we have already brought a lot of attention to this city, that it can complement the entrepreneurs that work in this city, that it can complement organizations like Tim Cowden's with the KC Area Development Corporation, who are sourcing businesses that fit here, I think is a huge advantage to, again, be on the world stage where people will be looking in. There is an organization we've set up on the plaza called KC House. This will be a place where we are welcoming people that come here to say, look at the innovation that happens here. Look at the kinds of businesses here. It will be a place to host and give a sense of the culture of the region and what is possible. So for me, when people say, what do we get out of this? What's the economic impact? There will be an immediate one of having a lot of visitors here that will come in and spend money and time here. I hope the legacy of this event is one that says it sparked new relationships, new business opportunities that we really probably can't. We certainly can't quantify, and we probably can't really foresee all those. And that, I think, is the promise here, and we should not lose sight of. If we can't write it down as a hard number, doesn't mean there aren't going to be those effects that follow on from this experience.
One piece of advice for the business owners in the community, I don't know if it's how to prepare, but any advice, if you had just one thing to say to them, what would it be?
I would say be ready. Be thinking of the scenarios that relate to what you know best, which is your business and your customer, and who will be adjacent to that customer during this time. And again, the Kauffman Foundation has been engaging with small business and community and support with many others in this community to try to make that more real for business owners here, to say, what does it mean for me? How will I engage? And I think that's going to be a positive. We and I were talking about technology. There is going to be an app, as there is for everything, but there are going to be ways for the visitors to connect and those businesses to be really behind that too. The Sports Commission, Visit KC, have really been thinking hard about how do we make sure that our businesses are engaged. Joe Reardon at the Chamber also, engaged and on the board here. So I feel good about the outreach that has taken place to think about really the diversity in our community, how to bring people to finding out where do I connect to these games, and how do I understand what it means for this area.
This episode will probably be published in the May timeframe, so it will be right before. I think we're less than 100 days away from the first match here in Kansas City.
93 to be be exact.
93. There we go. I saw the post about 100 was I guess 7 days ago.
Yeah.
Where will people be able to find that app, Esther? And what do you know the name of the app?
So if you go to kc2026.org, there is all kinds of information about how you can get regular updates. You can download the app. Visit KC is also playing a key role in directing people to the right resources. So whether it's figuring out how do I get to a match, how do I get to FanFest, which, not everyone may want to go to a match, can go to the match. There's going to be a great venue there at the Liberty Memorial that will, again, you'll need to register, to get in there and have access to those things. But it's going to be a fun part of the event.
Yeah. So, Esther, tell me about obviously the teams that are playing here are going to be, staying, I believe, in the area. But was there a concerted effort? I know teams that are not playing in the Kansas City region, like England, and I can't remember the other two. But did you guys make a concerted effort to kind of attract other teams to make this their home base?
I think we are very happy to see that we got 4 base camps. And we have 6 matches, including a quarterfinal. And I know a lot of people have looked around, even from other host cities, to say, wow, Kansas City, small city, how did you achieve that? And I think, again, it comes from the network of sports, the reputation of having Sporting KC, having a women's soccer team here, having the Chiefs agreed to modify their stadium so that we could hold the matches there, and having the facilities. These are things that people invested in 2 decades ago, Jeff, that are now bearing the fruits of saying that recognition has what's attracted Argentina to say, we want a base camp in Kansas City. The UK, base camping here. The Netherlands, Algeria, all of that, I think, is building on work that was done long ago. And that reputation for Kansas City has brought this to our area. Same with the 6 matches. Having a quarterfinal here is a big deal. Having the first match be Argentina, and
right,
it creates a lot of attention. It creates a lot of expectation on the part of us that are thinking about the delivery of these games.
Sure.
But I think that's why you've had people so committed from the earliest days to say, we want to deliver these games in an excellent fashion so that the experience, both for the people playing here, people that are visiting, And people that live in this region have something to come away with and say, wow, that was a great
Yeah.
experience.
Long after the final match is being played here in Kansas City, what do you hope the lasting legacy of the 2026 World Cup will be for Kansas City?
This is probably one of the most important things. And obviously, we're heads down. We've got to deliver the games, but we have not lost sight of the fact you do want a legacy from this. And some people think about legacy as a physical thing. You know, we want to leave a building in place, a soccer field. I don't know. That we've talked about all of those things. I think one thing we've really focused on, though, is the legacy we want for Kansas City is what's possible for us. What were we able to achieve in terms of delivering something? A legacy of thinking, for example, about transportation. Maybe this will be a catalyst for us to think about what was possible in terms of moving people around to these various venues in a regional sense. And that's the last thing I think when I think about legacy for these games. Look what we've been able to do across borders, across municipalities, to bring people together and say, we need to solve and deliver something. If we can do that, there will be, I think, a lot of legacy to build on, whether it's a future event, a future commitment that the region might want to make. I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to think about legacy in different ways.
Yeah, so good, so good. Esther, I asked two questions to every guest just to help two groups of people. If you were sitting on the couch with me at 22 years old, what advice would you give the 22-year-old Esther George in terms of starting her professional career and getting that first job?
Yeah, I think thinking big, Jeff, would be, and again, we always tell young people, you know, pursue your passions. You have to also prepare people to say it isn't a straight line. And being open to diversions in that path, to taking that job that you think, oh, that's not New York City for me.
Right.
Being willing to take on things that you think you may not be able to do, it all comes together. I used to have employees come to my office early in their career to say, what do I have to do to get your job? And I said, do the one you have the best you can.
Yeah.
Because we don't control all the levers in that. And so certainly think big, go after what you want, but you have to be, I think, flexible. And it's not going to be a straight line between what I want and where I'm at today.
Yeah, the second group is if you consider your career and that first time you got the role and you were responsible for the first time for a team of people, so you became a manager or supervisor, wherever the title was, what advice would you have for them as they begin that leadership journey of leading a team?
I think my advice would be listen carefully. The wisdom of that group resides in each of those people. And you are responsible. You will be accountable for the leadership of that group, but it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. And I wish early in my time of being named a manager or a supervisor of a group of people, I had tapped into that sooner rather than later. I spent a lot of time thinking, how do I come up with the right answer? And often it was right. It's right at the tables around me. So I think the sooner you learn, some people call it servant leadership, but it really is the role of saying the leader has to engage the group and understand what they need, what they know, and then you can help make decisions that take the group forward.
Esther, thank you so much for coming on the Corporate Couch. I'm honored. Thank you for all the things you've done for the Kansas City community in the past and in the future, not only Kansas City, but the nation as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be with you.
Joe, what can you say about Esther, besides the fact I'm just humbled to be in her presence? She's so smooth. I mean, I'm not saying that in like she's just brilliant as her mind.
Smartest person we've interviewed in a long time.
Well, you can say that. I can't have favorites, but yes, I would agree that she's one of the top 2 or 3 intelligent. And she was just so fun to talk to. I couldn't throw her off. I started with, I'll start with a fun question, Esther. If inflation was a movie, what movie would it be? Didn't blink an eye, Jaws. it's inflation, as an invisible tax, hits people differently depending on their spending habits. You don't see it coming. You just feel it, just like getting bit by a shark.
It's great.
Yeah, I just thought just so many, what's the most common question you would get at a cocktail party or a happy hour or barbecue? She said, oh, are the rates going up or down? What's going on with interest rates? So I thought that was fun. And just her take on the innovation happening today in the financial markets and decentralization, where she talked about blockchain and, how risks are often underestimated early on in terms of new technology. We celebrate all the benefits, just like we're going through AI right now, but we discover the risks later. So, and our concerns in that area, fewer banks, more centralized systems, sometimes tech replacing human roles. And then, she's on the board of the KC FIFA World Cup 2026, with some people like Clark Hunt, the owner of the Chiefs, and Cliff Illig, one of the co-founders of Cerner, a huge company in Kansas City that Oracle bought, and many others. So I know you'll probably touch on this, but she talked about the economic impact, or I asked her about it, and she goes, her transparency was so good. She just said, if you want a number, be careful, because it's focus on the relationships, the exposure, the long-term opportunity that Kansas City will have because they're a host city. There were so many great things. What was some of your things,
Well,
Joe?
one of the things that I noticed is just the variety of the conversation. It just went on and on and on, and no matter what you threw at her, she could just pivot. And now I'm talking about this other thing. So she was talking about inflation, she was talking about blockchain, she was talking about the Fed, she was talking about interest rates, and then she turns around and starts talking about the World Cup coming to Kansas City. And yeah, you're right. She said that if you're thinking about what is the economic impact of something like the World Cup moving to Kansas City, what does that mean? And one thing that you can't do is you can't put numbers on it. She would say, be very careful about putting any numbers to it, because I'll tell you this, the numbers will be wrong. Whatever number you say, it's $100 million, $10 million, $1 million,
right,
or whatever, it'll be wrong. Yeah. So don't try to do that, but think of the fuzzy things and the impact that it has on the lives of the Kansas Cityans. That is so much in the news right now, not just in Kansas City, but in Chicago and in Las Vegas, where they're talking about moving teams. Chicago, the Bears are talking about moving across the state line to Indiana. The Chiefs are talking about moving the state line to Kansas. The A's are trying to move into Las Vegas and having all sorts of trouble doing that. And you step back and you say, I wonder if that's worth it. And the answer is probably is. But right. There are so many. Oh, she said this so many times. There are so many things pulling the levers. That's the terminology they use. Right. The population pulls the levers. The Congress pulls the levers. Inflation pulls the levers. Interest rates.
And you don't control.
And you don't have it. You don't have any. Actually, the Fed, when she was talking about that, the Fed has control over exactly one of them, and it's very loose control anyway, and that's the interest rates. But there's so many other things.
Yeah, businesses, consumers, the government, they all play roles. So
a lot of it is in attitude or is mood, So in Kansas City, we're starting to get excited about the World Cup. The people in Kansas are starting to get excited about the Chiefs moving in. That excitement means something and probably translates to some sort of number somewhere. But that's just one of the levers that's being pulled. So it was a great interview. I loved the variety in the interview, and I loved...
Yeah, what did you think of her take comparing the 2008 huge recession with COVID?
With COVID and the pandemic, it was funny because she was talking about there that in 2008, Wall Street got a lot of money from the federal government in form of bailouts.
Companies, yeah.
But people didn't, And then in the pandemic, it was the other way around, where they were literally handing out money to here, come and get this money, which obviously has its own risk in fraud and things like that. But And it drove inflation because of government spending driving inflation.
Yeah, it was a faster rebound in COVID, but
right.
it pushed inflation
at the price
higher.
of inflation. Right.
Yeah.
So what does all that mean? Well, it's complicated. It's like my Facebook status. It's complicated. It was a great interview. I loved it.
Yeah. Joe, we're recording here on March 20th, and it's unseasonably warm. It's going to be close to 90 degrees here in Kansas City. What's going on with you?
Yeah, I'm excited because spring is finally here. I got so excited about it that I wet my plants.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.